He wasn't the kind of star who came from privilege or fame. He came from cracked sidewalks, empty pockets, and a skateboard that carried him through the streets of New York like it was the only thing that ever listened. Years later, those same streets would whisper his name again, not in celebration, but in remembrance. Justin Pierce wasn't supposed to make it to Hollywood, and yet he did. From the raw chaos of Kids to the laughs of Next Friday, his story moved like a fast-cut brief, bright, and gone too soon. How does someone rise from the underground to the silver screen, only to disappear before the applause even fades? Let's get into his story right now. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea, sit back, and let's start this journey together. Justin Pierce was born on the 21st of March 1975 in London, England, but his story truly began in New York City. His family moved to Manhattan when he was still a child, settling in the Bronx, a place that was as alive as it was unforgiving. In those crowded streets, surrounded by graffiti-covered walls and the rumble of subway trains, Justin learned early what it meant to survive. He went to PS7 for elementary school and JHS 141 inches Riverdale, but classrooms never held his attention. The city outside the window was louder, more real, and full of stories that no textbook could ever tell. By the time he turned 15, his parents had divorced, and the world he knew suddenly cracked apart. He and his mother left New York for Pennsylvania, trying to start over, but distance doesn't always heal. Life there was quieter, but not kinder. The bond between mother and son, already strained, grew tense. Justin began to act out, skipping school, pushing boundaries, chasing freedom in the only way he knew, on a skateboard. The concrete became his canvas, his escape. He would ride for hours, carving through the silence, trying to find balance not just on the board, but in his life. Eventually, the walls of that small Pennsylvania town felt too tight for him. He packed up and left, heading back to New York, to the city that never asked questions, only watched. There, he found a group of kids who lived the same way he did, chasing adrenaline, chasing belonging. They skated, laughed, stole, and survived together. They called the basement where they lived the dungeon, and it became their home. Among them was Harold Hunter, another skater who carried his own wounds. Both his parents had died from addiction. He and Justin bonded immediately, two boys trying to fill a void the world had left behind. Harold was the heart of their group, wild and fearless. Justin followed, drawn to his confidence, his warmth. Together, they rode through New York streets like they owned them, but deep down, both knew they were trying to escape something they couldn't name. In those years, Justin got into trouble more than once. The police caught him with marijuana and heroin at a roadblock, but because he was still a minor, he was sent back to his mother. That return didn't fix anything. The silence between them had grown too heavy, and soon he was gone again, back to New York, back to the streets that felt more like home than any house ever could. By 19, Justin was essentially homeless, but he didn't see himself that way. To him, the city was enough. The parks, the rooftops, the curbs, they were his world. He became part of the original Zoo York skateboard crew, a group that would later define New York's skate culture. They weren't famous, they weren't rich, but they had style, courage, and something raw that couldn't be faked. Skateboarding videos began to capture that underground energy, the noise, the danger, the freedom. Justin appeared in several of them, especially in a promotional video for Supreme, long before it became a global brand. You can still see him there grinning, reckless, completely alive. For a kid who'd known so much chaos, skating gave him rhythm. It was during one of those afternoons in Washington Square Park, bored under his feet, that fate noticed him. A photographer and filmmaker named Larry Clark was walking through, searching for real kids to cast in his next project, a film about teenage life in the city. When he saw Justin, he saw something the camera could never fake: raw honesty. Clark stopped him and asked if he wanted to audition. Justin didn't hesitate. He had nothing to lose. No home, no steady job, no reason to say no. That day, standing in the park, he couldn't have known that moment would change everything, that his life would soon blur the line between fiction and reality. When he read for the part, it wasn't acting, it was remembering. The pain, the laughter, the recklessness, it was all there. Larry Clark found in Justin the spirit of his film. A kid who lived without fear because he'd already lost too much. That film would be called Kids. Before the red carpets and flashing lights, before anyone ever said his name with admiration or sadness, Justin was just a boy riding through New York, trying to find his place in a world that never gave him one. He didn't know it yet, but that restless heart of his, that unfiltered, aching honesty, would soon make him unforgettable. It happened almost by accident, the kind of moment no one could ever plan. One afternoon in Washington Square Park, Justin was skating like he always did, the sound of wheels scraping against concrete echoing through the air. Larry Clark, a photographer turned filmmaker, stood nearby, camera slung over his shoulder, watching. He wasn't looking for actors, he was looking for truth. And in Justin Pierce, he found it. Clark was preparing a film called Kids, written by one 8-year-old skateboarder, Harmony Korine, a story about teenagers living fast in the streets of New York, where innocence and destruction walked hand in hand. The film wasn't about pretending, it was about being. So when Clark met Justin, he didn't see a performer, he saw a living embodiment of the story he wanted to tell. Justin agreed to audition, though audition wasn't really the right word. He didn't read lines or rehearse, he just talked, moved, and lived as he always did. Larry Clark later said he was a natural, raw, and unfiltered someone who carried the city in his bones. The role of Casper was written for him. When filming began, the set wasn't glamorous. It was real, chaotic, and alive. Many of the young cast members, including Harold Hunter, Leo Fitzpatrick, Rosario Dawson, and Chloe Sevigny, were pulled straight from the same skate scene Justin came from. They weren't actors. They were kids who'd grown up on cracked sidewalks and late-night corners. They knew the world Larry Clark was trying to capture because they lived it. The film Kids became infamous before it even premiered. It portrayed drugs, sex, and violence with an honesty that made audiences deeply uncomfortable. For some, it was art. For others, it was exploitation. But for Justin, it was simply life on screen. His portrayal of Casper, reckless, charming, tragic, was so convincing that people couldn't tell where Justin ended and the character began. Behind the scenes, the cast lived much like their on-screen selves. There were stories of real drugs on set, late-night parties, and fights that spilled out into the city. During one shoot at the Tunnel nightclub, Justin broke his wrist fighting bouncers after trying to steal liquor from the bar. Even with the injury, he showed up the next day ready to work. He didn't see acting as a job, it was another ride, another fall, another chance to feel alive. When Kids premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 1995, it shocked Hollywood. Critics couldn't ignore it, the film was too raw, too real. Harvey Weinstein bought the distribution rights, forming a new company just to release it, since Disney, which owned Miramax, refused to attach its name. The controversy only fueled its legend. Kids cost less than $2 million to make, but earned over $20 million worldwide. Yet for Justin and the other street kids who gave the film its pulse, fame didn't come with fortune. They made almost nothing, a few $100s, some free clothes, and whatever was passed around during filming. But Justin didn't care. For a boy who once had nothing, being part of something that the whole world was suddenly talking about felt like victory. He would go on to win the Spirit of Independence Award for Best Debut Performance, an honor that should have marked the beginning of a long career. But for Justin, the spotlight was confusing. It felt too bright, too far from the world he knew. He wasn't chasing stardom, he was still chasing meaning. And in that chase, Hollywood was waiting, just around the corner, ready to offer him everything and take just as much in return. After Kids hit theaters, everything changed, at least from the outside. The film became an underground sensation, the kind of movie people whispered about before they saw it and argued about long after the credits rolled. It was raw, unfiltered, and unapologetically real, a mirror held up to America's youth culture. And what it saw wasn't pretty. For Justin Pierce, fame arrived quietly but hit hard. Overnight, he went from a nameless skater sleeping on couches to someone the world wanted to talk about. But the truth was, he didn't know how to handle it. He wasn't trained to be a celebrity, he was trained to survive. Hollywood's sudden fascination with him felt strange, even hollow. He gave interviews, smiled for cameras, but always seemed detached, like he was watching himself from far away. He never looked comfortable in those moments, one friend later recalled. He belonged on a board, not a red carpet. The success of Kids launched several careers. Chloe Sevigny and Rosario Dawson became household names. Leo Fitzpatrick continued acting steadily. But Justin? He didn't follow the same path. His energy was different, too unpredictable, too wild for the kind of structure Hollywood demanded. Directors wanted that raw edge, but the industry wanted to polish it, and that was something he couldn't fake. Behind the applause, there was still struggle. Despite his breakout role, Justin earned little from the film, barely enough to cover rent. "We didn't do it for money," he once said. "We just wanted to skate and live." But even if he wasn't chasing wealth, the reality of being broke in a world that suddenly expected him to shine was hard to ignore. He returned to New York for a while, back to the streets that raised him. There, he reunited with Harold Hunter and other friends from the skate scene. They were local legends, now faces people recognized from the movie, but fame didn't change the rhythm of their lives. They still hung out in the same parks, smoked the same cigarettes, shared the same laughter that had kept them alive before Hollywood noticed. Still, something inside Justin was shifting. Fame had given him visibility, but not peace. He once said that Kids was too real, that sometimes it didn't feel like a film at all. The line between who he played and who he was had blurred, and it haunted him. People on the street called him Casper, not Justin. To them, he was the reckless kid from the movie, frozen forever in that moment of youth, wildness, and destruction. In interviews, he often deflected questions about his personal life, steering the conversation back to skating. "That's the only thing that makes sense to me," he'd say. The board, the city, the motion, they were constants in a world that suddenly demanded too much from him. Even with offers from Hollywood coming in, he hesitated. He didn't trust the system, didn't understand the game. But deep down, there was still a spark, a quiet hope that maybe, if he chose carefully, acting could become something more than luck. By 1997, Justin decided to take the leap and move to California. It was his chance to see what the world beyond New York could offer. Friends were worried they knew he wasn't built for the glitz of Los Angeles, but he went anyway. Maybe he wanted to test himself. Maybe he just needed to know if there was life after Kids. As his flight took off, the city he called home shrank beneath him, fading into the distance. He had no idea that he was leaving behind not just a place, but a version of himself that would never return. Kids had made him visible, but visibility isn't the same as being seen. And for Justin Pierce, that difference would define the rest of his life. California was a different world. The skies were open, the palms stood still, and everyone seemed to be chasing a dream that shimmered just out of reach. For Justin Pierce, it was both a beginning and a test. He arrived in Los Angeles in 1997, a 22-year-old with a skateboard, a few acting credits, and a past that clung to him like a shadow. It didn't take long for him to find work. That same year, he appeared in A Brother's Kiss, a gritty New York drama starring John Leguizamo and Michael Rappaport. Though it was filmed partly back east, the project gave Justin credibility proof that he could hold his own among professional actors. He wasn't just a one-time phenomenon from Kids. He was building something. Soon after, he was cast in First Time Felon, an HBO original film alongside Omar Epps, Delroy Lindo, and Stretch from Naughty by Nature. It was the kind of project that signaled Hollywood was beginning to take notice. The story followed a young man's journey through the prison system and the struggle to reclaim his dignity, a theme Justin understood all too well. Those who worked with him said he brought a rare authenticity to the role. It wasn't performance, it was lived experience. But while his resume grew, his discomfort with Los Angeles deepened. He missed New York, the chaos, the honesty, the noise that matched the rhythm of his own thoughts. In LA, everything felt curated, filtered through layers of illusion. "People out here don't seem real," he once told an interviewer. "They care more about who you know than who you are." That sense of alienation followed him everywhere through auditions, parties, and even success. Still, Hollywood couldn't resist him. His mix of street energy and vulnerability made him unpredictable in a way the camera loved. Directors saw depth in his eyes, a kind of fragility hidden behind a smile. But off-camera, the same rawness made it hard for him to adapt. He'd show up late, disappear for days, sometimes vanish mid-project. The old habits of running when things got heavy hadn't left him. Between film shoots, he'd escaped to New York just to breathe, skating with old friends, trying to find pieces of himself that Hollywood couldn't touch. Yet every time he went back, more of those friends had drifted away, some lost to addiction, others to time. He was caught between two worlds, one that never accepted him and one that no longer existed. By the late 1990s, Justin's name was floating quietly through industry circles. He wasn't famous, but he was known the kind of actor you remembered, even if you couldn't recall where you'd seen him. There was talk of something big coming, something that could finally merge his edge with mainstream success. Then came Next Friday. The sequel to Ice Cube's hit comedy offered him a role unlike anything he'd done before. Roach, a stoner with a soft heart and an infectious laugh. For once, Justin was allowed to be funny, relaxed, human. He wasn't playing pain, he was playing joy, even if just for a moment. On set, he was loved. Everyone described him as genuine, humble, easy to laugh with. For a brief time, it felt like the storm had passed. Standing under the California sun, Justin Pierce finally seemed to have found what he'd been searching for, a place in Hollywood that still felt like him. But every light, no matter how bright, casts a shadow. Success looked good on Justin Pierce, but it never felt natural. The more he worked, the more he seemed to drift away from the joy that had first brought him there. Fame had arrived not as a celebration, but as a quiet pressure that followed him everywhere. On movie sets, people treated him differently now. They saw him as an actor, not the skater kid from the Bronx. But Justin never saw himself that way. He once said that Los Angeles was too bright for people like me. He meant it. In a city where smiles could be rehearsed and kindness was often a transaction, Justin longed for the honesty of New York, for cracked pavement and the smell of the city after rain. The same success that promised him freedom had made him feel trapped. He kept moving from one project to another, Pigeonholed, King of the Jungle, and guest appearances on Malcolm in the Middle. Each role was different, yet somehow they all carried a piece of him. But behind the easy smile and calm tone, friends noticed something darker. He was slipping into the same habits that had haunted his teenage years. During a film shoot in Pennsylvania, it was reported that Justin found a meth dealer in Philadelphia. He'd disappear from set for days, then return as if nothing had happened, polite, tired, but distant. No one really knew what was going on inside him, but those close to him sensed the growing loneliness. Hollywood's energy could electrify some people. For Justin, it drained him. In 1999, he married Gina Rizzo, a stylist he had met during his work in fashion. They wed in Las Vegas, the city of chance, where love and risk often shared the same heartbeat. Some said they had a daughter, though reports remain uncertain. What's certain is that, for a brief time, Justin seemed grounded. He smiled more, spoke softer, and began to think about a future beyond film. Then came Next Friday. Released on the 12th of January 2000, it opened to $14.5 million in its first week, a box office success. Audiences loved his character, Roach. Justin's chemistry with Ice Cube was effortless, his sense of humor natural. For many, it was the first time they saw the man behind the pain, the side that laughed easily, without pretending. But even at that peak, something felt off. Those who worked with him recalled moments of stillness between takes when he'd stare into space, detached, almost hollow. He had the look of someone trying to hold on to something slipping away. When the film's promotion tour brought the cast to Las Vegas later that year, Justin seemed distant again. Friends said he looked tired but was polite as always, the same quiet energy he carried from the start. Then, one morning in July 2000, everything stopped. Hotel staff found him in his room at the Bellagio. The news spread fast, 25 years old, gone just months after his biggest success. 2 notes were left behind but never released. No one knows what they said. The irony was unbearable. The city where he had married, where he'd laughed, had become the place where he said goodbye. For Justin Pierce, fame was never the destination. It was just a stop along the way, a brief moment of light before the silence. Fame didn't destroy Justin Pierce, silence did. After Next Friday, the noise around him faded, and in that quiet, all the things he'd tried to outrun began to return. The old restlessness, the confusion, the feeling that he didn't belong anywhere, they all came back, stronger than before. Those close to him said he had moments of brightness. He could still light up a room with his humor, still pull off a perfect trick on a skateboard, still talk about dreams as if they were within reach. But then, without warning, the light would dim. Conversations would drift into silence. His eyes would wander to some distant place no one else could see. He told friends he was tired, not physically, but emotionally. The kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. Hollywood wanted him to be consistent, but Justin had never lived a life built on consistency. He was unpredictable by nature, and that same chaos that made him brilliant on screen made real life harder to manage. When he worked on smaller projects after Next Friday, people noticed the tension. He seemed to be fighting something invisible, maybe depression, maybe addiction, maybe both. On set, he was kind, funny, but distant, as though acting had become less of an escape and more of a mask. Drug use, which had once been part of the wild energy of youth, now became a shadow that followed him everywhere. He'd disappear for days, then come back smiling, brushing it off as nothing. But his friends could see it. They said the laughter was still there, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those who knew him from his skateboarding days noticed how he'd grown quieter. He wasn't the same, one of them said later. He'd seen too much, too fast. Hollywood had taken a piece of him not through cruelty, but through indifference. The city celebrated him when he was wild, but when he needed peace, it had nothing to offer. He'd call some of his old friends in New York, talk about coming back, maybe opening a skate shop or doing something for the next generation. But the calls never turned into plans. Every time he tried to leave Hollywood, something pulled him back: a role, a promise, or maybe just hope that the next project would feel different. In private, Justin was said to be dealing with personal issues, trouble in his marriage, doubts about his career, and the lingering fear that he was already being forgotten. For someone who had always lived in motion, the stillness of success was unbearable. He was 25, but his eyes carried decades. Success hadn't erased the loneliness. It had only made it quieter. And as the lights of Las Vegas prepared to shine for another night, somewhere in a hotel room, Justin Pierce was left alone with his thoughts, the kind no applause could drown out. Las Vegas has always been a city of illusions where every light hides a shadow, and every success story carries a price. In July 2000, it became the last chapter of Justin Pierce's life. The cast and crew of Next Friday were in town for a promotional campaign. There were events, autograph signings, and interviews lined up to celebrate the film's success. For most, it was a weekend of laughter and excitement, the reward after long months of work. For Justin, it felt like noise in a place where he needed silence. He checked into the Bellagio Hotel, the same city where he had married just a year earlier. Friends noticed he seemed distant but polite, the same soft-spoken energy he always carried. He smiled when people approached him, laughed when others joked, but there was a weight behind those gestures, something no one could quite read. The morning of July 10th began like any other. Cast members and production staff gathered for another day of appearances. When Justin didn't show up, at first no one worried he was known to keep odd hours. But as time passed and calls went unanswered, concern grew. Hotel security was asked to check his room. What they found ended the story too soon. Justin Pierce was gone, just 25 years old. Reports say he had taken his own life sometime during the night. 2 handwritten notes were found near him, but their contents were never made public. The words that might have explained everything were sealed forever. The news spread fast, rippling through the film and skateboarding communities like a shockwave. To many, it didn't seem real. How could someone so full of life, so spontaneous, be gone just like that? Those who knew him well weren't surprised by his sadness, but they were devastated by its finality. Leo Fitzpatrick, his co-star from Kids, later said he believed it was a drunken mistake, that if Justin had just fallen asleep, he might have woken up and moved on. Others whispered about heartbreak, rumors of infidelity, emotional exhaustion, or the loneliness that fame never cures. No one really knew. Maybe no one ever could. Hollywood mourned briefly, then moved on, as it always does. But in New York, among the streets where Justin once skated, his name stayed alive. Murals appeared. Old friends gathered at Washington Square Park, leaving boards and flowers in his memory. They didn't talk much, they just rode, letting the sound of wheels on pavement say what words couldn't. 6 years later, tragedy struck again when Harold Hunter, Justin's closest friend, died of a cocaine-induced heart attack. Those who loved them both said Harold never recovered from losing Justin. The two had lived fast, dreamed loudly, and burned out before the world was ready to listen. Justin Pierce didn't leave behind a long filmography. but he left behind a feeling that brief spark of realness Hollywood can never manufacture. For a moment, he made the world look at the kind of kid it usually overlooks. And then, just like the flash of a camera, he was gone. When Kids was released in 1995, it divided audiences but defined a generation. It wasn't just a movie. It was a reflection, a snapshot of American youth at its most vulnerable. The film captured a moment in time when innocence collided with survival, when the streets raised children faster than their parents could. And at the center of it all was Justin Pierce, the reckless, laughing soul named Casper, whose smile masked a slow kind of heartbreak. Casper became more than a character. He became a symbol of the youth that Hollywood rarely showed, of the kids who lived without safety nets or second chances. In his rawness, there was truth. In his destruction, there was honesty. That was Justin's gift. He didn't act the pain, he embodied it. Long after his passing, critics and fans began to look at Kids differently. What once shocked audiences now reads like a time capsule, the sound of a decade trying to find itself. The New York of the mid-1990s, with its underground energy, its cultural collisions, and its hunger for authenticity, lives on in that film. And Justin's performance anchors it. He's not the hero, not the villain, just a boy caught between both, the way so many were back then. His co-stars went on to fame Rosario Dawson to Hollywood blockbusters, Chloe Sevigny to acclaimed indie roles, yet all of them, in interviews, have spoken about Justin with reverence. They called him real, fearless, one of a kind. Even years later, when documentaries revisited the making of Kids, his name carried weight, the quiet acknowledgement that the movie's soul had left with him. For the skateboarding community, Justin never stopped being one of them. His presence in early Zoo York and Supreme videos became the blueprint for a culture that would later sweep the world. Before skateboarding had sponsors, social media, or million-dollar deals, it had kids like Justin, unpolished, fearless, and free. The brands that built entire lifestyles on that attitude still owe something to those early, unrecorded nights in Washington Square Park. Even today, when skaters talk about authenticity, they bring up Justin Pierce, not for his movies, but for his spirit, the way he never pretended to be anything other than what he was. He was real before real became a word people sold, one of his friends once said. His influence also lingers quietly in American film. Kids opened a door that allowed future filmmakers to explore darker, more truthful portraits of youth. Without Justin and his castmates, there might not have been 13, Mid-90s, or Euphoria. Every time a story dares to show adolescence not as fantasy, but as survival, his shadow is somewhere in the frame. Justin Pierce's legacy isn't built on longevity, it's built on honesty. He lived fast, told the truth, and paid the price. But for a generation that grew up in the noise of the 90 seconds, his story became something sacred, a reminder that even the lost ones leave a mark. He didn't change Hollywood. He didn't have to. He changed how we look at the kids the world never saw. In the years after Justin Pierce's death, time has been both cruel and kind. Cruel, because Hollywood moved on as it always does. Kind, because those who truly saw him never stopped remembering. In New York, where his story began, his name still lingers like an echo. The old skaters from Washington Square Park still talk about him not with sadness, but with a strange kind of pride. He lived the way he wanted, they say, even when it cost him everything. Each year, on the anniversary of his passing, a few of them still gather at the park, boards under their arms, to write a few lines in his honor. No speeches, no fanfare, just motion the language he spoke best. Supreme, the brand that once filmed him before fame ever called, remains an unspoken monument to that era. Every photo of those early days, the cracked pavement, the faded t-shirts, the unfiltered faces, carries a piece of Justin's spirit. He helped define a culture before the world realized it was watching one take shape. Hollywood, meanwhile, rarely mentions his name. The industry that once used his image to sell realism quickly forgot him. But among actors and directors who value authenticity, his story is whispered like a warning that fame without grounding can be lethal, that truth on screen doesn't protect you from pain off it. Documentaries about kids continue to surface. Each one revisits the controversy, the brilliance, and the consequences of a film that changed American indie cinema. In every frame where Justin appears, there's a magnetic pull, an energy that feels alive even now. Viewers still leave comments online, He felt real. You could tell he wasn't acting. He looked like someone I knew. That's the legacy few actors ever reach, to be remembered, not as a performer, but as a person. For many who grew up watching Kids or Next Friday, Justin became a symbol of something deeper: the fragility of youth, the danger of sudden fame, and the humanity hidden inside every headline. He was proof that being seen by millions doesn't always mean being understood. When Harold Hunter died 6 years later, it felt like the closing of a circle. Two friends who lived like brothers, gone too soon, both remembered as legends of the same forgotten corner of New York. For their community, those losses weren't statistics. They were personal. Every new skater who steps into the park rides in the shadow of their names. And yet, beyond tragedy, there's gratitude. People remember Justin not just for how he died, but for how he lived raw, fearless, and unfiltered. His story reminds audiences that greatness isn't always measured in awards or longevity. Sometimes it's measured in honesty and how deeply one life, no matter how short, can touch another. Today, when people rediscover Kids or stumble across his scenes in Next Friday, they often pause, wondering what might have been if he'd had more time. But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe Justin Pierce gave the world exactly what he was meant to: a glimpse of truth, a moment of connection, and a name that still carries meaning long after the fame faded. They may not talk about him on Hollywood stages or red carpets, but on the cracked streets of New York, where it all began, his story still rolls on in every sound of a skateboard cutting through the wind. In the end, Justin Pierce's story isn't just about loss. It's about recognition. It's about what it means to be seen, even for a fleeting moment, and how that moment can echo long after the lights go out. He began as a boy on a skateboard, carving through the noise of New York, chasing freedom on cracked concrete. He ended as an actor the world couldn't quite understand, too real for Hollywood, too fragile for the myth it tried to make of him. Somewhere between those two lives, he became a symbol of truth, a reminder that not every success story has a happy ending, but every honest one matters. People still talk about Kids, about the chaos and controversy that surrounded it. But underneath that noise lies the simple truth that Justin Pierce gave something rare: a piece of himself. His performances didn't feel scripted because they weren't. They came from the same place as his pain, his laughter, his humanity. And that's what audiences still feel when they watch him: not fame, but presence. Maybe Justin never wanted to be remembered as a star. Maybe he just wanted to be remembered as real. And in that sense, he succeeded. Because decades later, his name still carries weight, not through Hollywood headlines, but through the quiet corners of memory where people whisper, "I remember him." If you ever felt like the world moved too fast to notice you, maybe you'll understand why his story matters. He was one of those rare souls who lived without pretending, who stumbled, fell, and still managed to leave a mark deep enough for others to follow. Do you think Hollywood ever gave him the respect he deserved? If this story touched you, hit that subscribe button and help us keep their light alive. Leave a comment below, tell us what you remember about Justin Pierce, or about the first time you saw Kids or Next Friday. Because remembering isn't just nostalgia, it's how we keep the truth alive. He once said that the people in Los Angeles didn't seem real, but Justin Pierce was. He was real in his laughter, in his pain, in every imperfect frame he left behind. And though his time was brief, it was honest, and that kind of light doesn't fade. It just shines where fewer eyes can see.